Hey there folks, Bowman here with another tree related video. And I need to mention up front that there's not a lot of video entertainment here, so I apologize for those of you who want, step-by-step videos. I didn't really plan on recording this job, but the landowner involved did grab a few shots and some video, so I thought I'd try and use that to show some aspects of this particular job, and hopefully somebody might get something useful here. So if you're experienced with this work, then another disclaimer, this video just isn't for you. I meant this for folks who aren't professionals, who do have some experience dropping trees potentially off of their main lean, but maybe have encountered a situation like this where precision felling is necessary, but maybe want a few pointers or aren't quite sure whether or not you can do it or how to go about it. So that is the intent here. Now, every situation involving a tree obviously is different, and the approaches you might need to use and the circumstances involved might be, honestly quite a bit different than what I'm going to show here. And I'm in no way recommending that you take on something that's clearly beyond your capabilities. I'm in this video simply trying to provide some basic tips and thoughts that I go through when sizing up and executing a job like this that isn't, in the broad scheme of things, all that sketchy if you have a certain amount of skill with a chainsaw. So let's get into this job. This was done for a colleague and a friend of mine from my college days at his home located on the Minnesota side of the St. Croix River Valley. One day we were chatting and he didn't realize I did this type of work, so after indicating I might be able to help him, he sent me some photos from his phone, including the ones shown here. As you know by the title of the video, the tree concerned is a Siberian elm. That's an exotic species that was introduced to North America as a Dutch elm disease resistant alternative to American elm, and unfortunately has become naturalized and pretty darn invasive. Now, I had never dropped a Siberian elm outside of a really small tree or patches of trees that had invaded open grasslands. So I was intrigued to tackle what I thought was at least a moderate-sized tree here. However, the photos really didn't do the tree justice at all. And I didn't get a very good idea of what I was up against until I went down to assess the job and complete it recently, just about a week ago. At maturity, this species is known to grow to just under 90 feet tall, over 3 feet dBH, and with a canopy of 50 feet wide, potentially even wider than that. Now, although this particular tree wasn't quite that large, as you can see by the stats on it, which were measured either on site or also by using measurement tools on a georeferenced air photo, this particular tree, which was only just under 50 years of age based on the growth rings, had grown to about 70 feet in height, was just under 3 feet at the stump, and had a canopy width of about 40 feet. So no tree to take lightly for sure, especially when targets are involved, and it was a much I guess you could say more involved tree than what I had anticipated. The owner had some experience dropping some smaller Siberian elms in the past, but had a very close call with one that almost resulted in disaster. So he wanted someone with more expertise to tackle this particular tree, which is quite understandable. Now, it was leaning pretty heavy toward the house, which you can see by these still photos and the air photo with annotation. The yellow line shows the direction of lean. The blue line shows my aiming point, and the orange line, the intended lay accounting for the tree's lean, with the ends or the arrows at the ends of those lines showing the approximate 70-foot length from the stump to the tip of the longest branches if the tree was falling along any of those vectors. So these photos also show the targets and the hazards involved, which is important to size up, obviously, anytime you're going to do a job like this. Right next to the bole of the tree was a small raised garden and flower bed, noted right here. These areas here are ground level landscaping and ornamental plantings, one of which right here had an old stump along the intended lay, which could obviously cause some problems. And over here is a smaller box elder and moderate sized American elm that the owner didn't want taken out. You can also, or you can't really tell here, but I'll point out later that there was a fairly sizable branch off the other elm about here that needed to be taken down first using a pole saw. Otherwise, it would have been taken out during the felling operation and would have for sure caused some severe damage to that tree. And obviously, for sure, the house is the main target of concern along the tree's main lean, and this shot here perhaps shows that better. You can also see horizontal branch extending toward the east from the main axis of the tree. That could easily tag the house if the tree didn't drop precisely as intended. To drop the tree without causing any damage to the structure or going off course and causing damage to other trees required that it be taken a good 30, a little more than 30 degrees or so off of its main lean. So there's a lot at play here, right? And although at least a little sketchy, since the tree was very sound and healthy, and since the main lean wasn't overly severe, I felt I could take it safely against its main lean. It should be obvious that for any tree felling operation, particularly one with a heavy leaner and crucial targets that have to be protected, preparation is crucial to doing something like this successfully. Here you can see the tall stump back here I mentioned earlier near the intended lay that could redirect some of the branches or even the entire bole of the tree as it hits the ground, so I did take that out before dropping the tree. It's also a little hard to see, but as I mentioned before, back here was a sizable branch on this American elm that would have been tagged and peeled a deep wound into the trunk during the operation. So I also decided to remove that with a pole saw beforehand. You can see that I opted to install a tag line, running it through an arborist block, which was anchored very close to my aiming point, and connected that to a Mazdam rope puller that was anchored at the base of a tree about 40-50 feet west of the target tree. And before I did that, we did clear around the bole of the stump and used a ladder supported from the ground to get the rope placed about 20 feet or so from the ground. The puller had about a 10-to-1 mechanical advantage, and by running it through the block and back to the other tree at an acute angle, that actually provided about nearly double the pulling power. However, there are a couple things that I want to mention regarding the tag line that you might not get if I left it at this. First, throwing a tag line in a tree isn't always necessary, and in fact in this case I actually didn't need it since the tree had sufficient lean towards the south. However, at the same time, extra insurance is always a nice thing to have, and it certainly didn't cost me anything other than a little bit of extra time. And in this case, it also helped increase the comfort level of the homeowner who had had some previous experiences with successfully roping over trees. So I guess it was worth the added time, in my opinion. You'll also notice that the rope was secured to the bole of the tree only about 20 feet high using a cinching knot. If I was actually going to use the rope to pull over such a tree that was that large, I'd normally establish a much greater purchasing height with the tie-in point. But in this case, I didn't do that because the tree didn't have a back lean and the natural lean was actually working with me. So You know, that might not have been the case if I were dropping it much farther against the lean. The pretension rope, and of course nothing crazy tight, mind you, was really there just as an added aid to ensure the tree would release in the intended direction a little more quickly from the stump. You'll note in the video clip that's coming up at the end just how slow that tree actually releases, something that the owner was surprised at as well. And that's because I had a stout hinge and was supporting, you know, and countering the natural lean because I had the direction of fall about 30 degrees off lean. Once released from the stump, you just need to be aware that that's when the security associated with a pre-tensioned rope or a cable is no longer going to be any of value in directing that tree to the ground. Only at that point, only the hinge on the stump is going to do that. So anyway, now that the tag line has been pre-tensioned in this case and the grounds have been prepped, it's time to start the felling cuts. Here's a couple shots when I'm getting ready to perform my first cut, the top cut in this case, for setting up the notch. It's pretty crucial if you're a novice cutter to understand that it's that very first cut you make when dropping a tree that is the most important one. The very first cut you make. That sets up the direction of fall. Some people get really hung up on which of the two cuts for the notch should be completed first. And honestly, it doesn't matter. At least for an open face or a conventional notch, you know, either the top or the bottom can be done first. I always tell people just do whichever one is most comfortable for you first. For me, I rarely do Humboldt notches. I don't need to. And for a conventional or open face notch, I personally like to do the top cut or sloping cut first and then simply use my eye-hand coordination when sighting down or through the kerf of the first cut to easily line up my bottom cut. That has always worked well for me to minimize bypassing or Dutchmans, as we call it, along the apex of the notch, which is something you absolutely have to avoid so the hinge doesn't break prematurely. Because once that hinge breaks, you lose complete control of the tree. But, you know, you might find that doing the bottom cut works better for you. To each his own. I've always been surprised, though, at how many cutters are unaware how to precisely sight up the intended lay of a tree that they're dropping. So that's really why I showed these photos. Almost all chainsaws, including most homeowner grade models, are going to have what's called gunning sight marks on the housing of the saw, highlighted here. They may or may not be painted a different color. They may just be embossed, but almost all saws have it, oftentimes on both sides of the saw. And by positioning yourself correctly in line with the gunning sight and your aiming point, you're able to precisely orient both of the notch cuts, and for that matter, the back cuts as well, toward your intended aiming point. Now, this photo shows the completed face cut or notch, as well as the beginnings of the back cut. Here I'm just using an open face notch with, which, you know, can vary between 70 to 90 degrees. Here it's closer to 70. You can keep the apex between the two cuts very pointed, like most people do, or you can create a slight vertical step or gap in the apex. I often do that, but you don't want to go crazy with that. I usually limit it to maybe 1 or 2 inch vertical step up, depending on the tree. Both an open face notch and a stepped up apex serve to promote much longer travel in the tree, longer than you might think, before the hinge is going to break. And if done correctly, the tree won't break off the stump until or just before it hits the ground. That maximizes safety and minimizes any lateral travel of the bole of the tree. In fact, sometimes the hinge won't break, and I oftentimes do that on purpose, and it's the safest way to go. You can then release the tree from the stump after it's on the ground. The hinge thickness as viewed from the side. In this case was just about 3 inches, and for any live tree should roughly be around 10% of the DBH of the tree. And that might seem thin to you, but that's actually more than enough strength to guide a tree down, especially if the wood is sound. And if you leave the hinge too thick, that could actually promote the tree to split up the trunk, and it's a bad situation to get in. So you don't want to go overboard with your hinge thickness. And that brings me to the next point I want to make on felling trees like this is you'll also note that I've used a bore cut, also known as a plunge cut, to establish the back cut on this tree. It's important to do this for any large enough diameter tree that also has a fair to heavy lean in it, especially if the species is prone to barber chairing up the trunk, which apparently Siberian elm are much more prone to do compared to other hardwoods and other elm. And given that I've used an open face notch, I really didn't need to place the bore cut, as I've done here, above the elevation of the notch's apex to create what's known as a stump shot. But I did so anyway, and it's something I've kind of gotten in the habit of doing. However, creating such a stump shot is more important if you end up using a conventional notch versus an open face. And as with the hinge, you have to be careful. Don't want to go crazy with the stump shot. It does provide an added safety feature to mitigate the butt end of the trunk from slipping or kicking back toward you as the tree falls. But when creating it, if you create too much elevation in that stump shot, it actually can then compromise the integrity of the hinge. So you generally don't want it to be much higher than the thickness of the hinge, as a general rule of thumb, if you're going to do a stump shot. The other reason why I like boring the back cut of a tree is that in situations like this where crucial targets are involved, is that there's no need to be in a hurry, folks. I can take all the time in the world that I need to set up my cuts, survey my surroundings, and so forth. This type of back cut and variations of it result in a backstrap or a post along the back or back quarter of the tree that is going to hold the tree true and fast in combination with the hinge wood. So long as the wood is sound, the tree at this point ain't going anywhere until you decide to release the holding wood in the back. And that's nice not to have to be in a hurry, because if you chase it from the back and start from the back, that tree can go at any time and you can't stop. You gotta keep going, and things can go wrong. So with a bore cut, setting up my back cut, I can be calm and ensure everyone in the area is in a safe location, fully prepare before the tree begins to travel to the ground, and it gives me a chance to reassess things in case for some reason I might want to put another tagline in a tree or approach it in a slightly different manner. I do have some opportunity to do that at this point using that type of cut. Okay, so at this point the tree is fully cut up, as we would say, and it's ready for the final felling cut. But since the tree was so large, just to point out, I don't show it anywhere in the video or a photo, is that I had enough room to slap in a wedge on the opposite low side of the tree. And I didn't really need to do it as with the rope and rope puller, but wedges definitely are your friend. I did sink one in just behind the hinge in this case to further support the hinge and provide just that little additional coaxing in the intended direction once the strap was released, just as the pre-tensioned rope with the rope puller was doing. And it also provides just that little added insurance against the tree coming back on me in case there was an unexpected strong wind gust occurring against the tree, against its direction of fall as I released it. So I guess with that, let's take a look at the final result. As you watch the video, and I'll repeat it a couple times, notice the sound of the wood fibers of the hinge bending and guiding the tree towards the ground. It's pretty cool. And for live trees in particular, you're going to hear this if you don't have earplugs in, which you should have in if you're cutting a tree anyway. But that hinge is doing tremendous work, and when set up correctly, that's what enables felling a tree with precision. All right, here we go. Alright, well that's a wrap. Hope you found something interesting in this video. Stay safe out there, folks. Until next time, Bowman out.